All right, so welcome back from the break. This is Monday, August 15th, night one of the live coding camp prep. So we're going to go ahead and get started here with some of the very basics of JavaScript. So what is a programming language? It lets us write lines of code to give the computer a set of instructions to perform to produce some kind of output. So basically we have input going in, we run it through our code that is going to be a series of operations, and that's going to give us hopefully a desired output. Output is text to the screen, creation of a file, something being printed, something being saved to a database. There's all different ways to create output. The computer will only perform exactly the instructions you have given it to perform. And this is why writing software is so difficult, is when I say, hey, I'm thirsty, so I'm going to pick up this can of water and I'm going to take a sip. As a computer, I have to basically say, am I thirsty? True or false? True, I'm thirsty. Okay, move out can grabber, right? Move down can grabber, grab the can, pick it up, move it back to my mouth, drink the water, swallow the water, don't choke, that's an error. Okay, you're done. Am I thirsty still? True or false? Okay, I'm still thirsty. We'll drink some more. I'm not thirsty anymore. Okay, move the can away from you. Put the can down. So something that we as humans think of something as like one motion and one operation can literally be hundreds of tiny little detailed steps. And when you're telling a computer to do something, you have to spell out all of those steps for the computer. And so that's where we start talking about being able to think programmatically and algorithmically. All right, so the very first thing we're going to cover is values. Every value is a piece of data or a data type, and that data type determines how the value behaves. So some values are numbers, some values are text, some values are functions, and so on. And again, we're talking specifically in JavaScript right now. So some languages like Java will have integers, and they'll have floating numbers, and they will have doubles, and they will have bigs that hold larger values. But for us in JavaScript, we're just going to be dealing with numbers, and sometimes a number is a whole integer, and sometimes it's floating, which means that there's a decimal point. All right, variables. So variables are named labels, identifiers for storing values. So remember from math class, variable X and Y, which also single letter variable names are not a good habit to get into. There's a couple of situations where it's okay, but we'll talk about why you should never just declare something as X or Y. So there's a couple of different ways to declare a variable in JavaScript. var is the old way of doing things. We want to try and avoid this. And if you go out and you search for solutions, or like if you're looking at a tutorial, you will still see var used. And I can write code today and I can write var, and it'll still run. It won't yell at me. However, we can get more specific than just var. And so we use let, which is similar to const. The let variable can be reassigned but not redeclared. And then const cannot be reassigned and not accessible before they appear within code. Var, let, and const are reserved keywords in JavaScript. You can't use them for anything other than declaring variables. And so let me go ahead and just demonstrate this real quick. So and this is Replit. We'll start with this tomorrow night if you haven't already gone to the Replit website and started an account. So this is basically an online text editor that is specific for coding. I set this as Node, so basically JavaScript is ran on Node, and there's all different sorts of languages that you can choose in Replit, but everything we do is going to be Node.js. And what it does is it looks just kind of like a text editor. I can type stuff. but it has some programming behind the scenes that are going to help me write my code a little bit clearer. Now, you can write code in a text file, right? So like you could open up just like on Windows, like Notepad or Notes on a Mac, and you can start writing code, and then you can save it as a .js file, and then your computer can run that code. However, I do not recommend it. It's basically like trying to write code with your both hands tied behind your back. Modern web development, we've got a whole suite of tools that makes our lives easier. And why do things the hard way when we can do things the easy way? Trust me, writing code's hard enough. Now, for me, like in the real world, in my day-to-day life, I use a program called Visual Studio Code, or VS Code. Like what I write for work for my day job, I'm not writing it in a Replit and an online editor. I'm writing code here, and basically going to be pulling it up, editing in here, and then I'm going to be pushing it up to a repository so that other developers on my team can pull it down, pull it apart, add it to their code. And that way, that's how we keep track of who's working on what, and that we're all able to work together. Right. And so, but I can say code. Right. So like this is some code, like basically in VS Code, this is all JavaScript. This is actually one of the programs, or one of the challenges that we'll handle in session 8 or session 9. This is one of the more complex ones. So don't worry if none of this makes any sense yet. But how much easier is this to read than if all of it was just black and white text, right? Like modern web development, there's all these different brackets, curly braces, parentheses. And if this wasn't helping me keep track of that, these colors match up. So like if I add an extra one, turns red, it starts telling me that there's problems going on. If you're trying to do this just in like a text editor, or write it in Microsoft Word and copy and paste it somewhere else, it's not going to be able to help you identify all of these little issues. Right. And so Replit is just an online version of what I have on my desktop and that I use for my day job. So the first one, and this is the one we don't use anymore, is var. So we can do var name equals Charles, right? And so this is a string, right? And so I can say var age equals 41, right? And so this is something, so this is my console. On VS Code, I have a console as well. So this is my console down here in my terminal. And basically this is going to output things to my console only when I tell it to, right? So if I run my program, nothing happens, right? So I have to tell it, hey, console, log this to the console, right? So I can say console.log Kevin, right? And now it says Kevin. Now I'm just console.logging the word Kevin. I can say name, right? And now it does Charles. And now I could do something like this. Right. And so now I've got some information here that's getting put out to the console, right? And these are where we start to get into the basic building blocks. Now, JavaScript is a dynamic language, which means that things can be changed dynamically. So this is why, and when I talk about that, like we don't want to use things like this, right? So if I say var x equals Chuck, right? And I say console.log X, right? I get Chuck. Now, this is creating a variable, instantiating it, and then this is assigning the variable X a string for Chuck. Now I can also reassign it, right? And so when I do this, I get 32. So even though this says X is equal to Chuck, down here I'm saying X is equal to 32. And now what I've done is switched from a string to a number. And there's not a big deal when we look at it right here. But if I do this, and if you didn't know that I did this, and all I see is that I'm going to get console.log X, can you really tell me what's going to come out into my console just by looking at this? No, right? Yes. So, Chad, that's a good question. He sent it to me. So in modern JavaScript, semicolons are not required. In Java and C#, you have to end lines with a semicolon, but they are not required in JavaScript. And in fact, like someone stylistically may want them, but every project I worked in professionally, like we do not use semicolons. And if you try and use a semicolon when we save the file, it automatically rips all the unnecessary semicolons out of it. So you do not need to add semicolons to things anymore. But so back to this, you can't tell me what this will put out over here without hitting the button. And now the problem is if I'm running this through a big program that is spread out over multiple files, you can't tell me if this is right or not, right? And so it's better with name, because now if I do name, and let's say that name is equal to 32, when I run this, I'm saying, well, you know, this should be a name, right? And I could make it even more explicit, first name, and right? And so I come down here and I run this, oops, fist name. How about first name? Oh, what did I do?
It's in the console log. That's misspelled.
Thank you. I was going to get there. So you just pointed out something very important. And this is also one of the rules that I didn't talk about. But so I've been doing this since January of 2019. I'm a senior software crafter, blah, 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 blah. I will screw things up. I promise. I will get things wrong. I will have typos. I will be, and even though I've taught this class like 5 times now, I'm still gonna, like, I try and do these challenges from the hip. For the most part, I will screw things up. If you see me screw something up, don't be scared to throw it out there. I'm not gonna get mad. In fact, usually I'm under great relief that someone saved me instead of letting me flail around in front of a class of 20 people while I'm being recorded, so that it can be later uploaded to YouTube and preserved for prosperity, for all time, basically. And if you go back and look at some of the other iterations of this class, I will not give you any timestamps in their 3-hour videos to make it really hard to find an exact moment, but there are definitely some recorded moments of me out there on YouTube absolutely panicking while I was teaching this class. So the next part, though, is always pay attention to your error messages, right? So I've got a typo right here. It's saying fist name is not defined. So, and then it's telling me in index.js, which is my file, on line 60, so all the way down here to line 60, space 13, I've got something that's not defined, right? So even if I run that and I'm here, I know that I can come down to here and then basically say, okay, that's where it is. So we'll fix that. We'll run it. It's great. But again, so now I've got something that's called first name in my program, and I'm getting the number 32. So if that was just X or Y or A or B or C, it's harder to pick out that there's something wrong. But now this is telling me right off the top of the bat, like, you know, I'm expecting a first name here. Why would I see the number 32? And I can come up here and kind of troubleshoot it and see what's going on. So this is var. We don't really use this anymore. This has been replaced by let. Cheat here, so probably Control D on a Windows, Command D on a Mac. You can do multi-select and replace multiple identical pieces of your code at the same time. So if I run this, the exact same thing happens. Nothing's really changed. All right. And so let's go ahead and do this and say first name. And you can also see this is something else that you don't get when you're just writing in like a word processor. Notice I've got suggestions here of ways that I can autocomplete this. So first name is what I'm looking for. There's that. That would also save me from making horrible typos and screwing everything up. So now, again, we come in, the computer reads the line code by code. It says, okay, create a variable first name, name it Charles, or assign the value Charles, do the same thing for age. Now reassign the variable first name and give it the value of Chuck. And now console.log, so print this to the console. And so I can take this, and we can do it multiple times, right? Once before, once after. So now I'll get a Charles and a Chuck to the console. All right. Now, with this, so let is just like var. This is declaring something, and then this is redeclaring it. So if I change this from a const to a let, type error, assignment to constant variable. So constants cannot be redeclared. They cannot be, or I'm sorry, they cannot have a value reassigned. So what's happening is I'm coming in, assigning Charles to the constant instead of the let first name, and then I'm trying to reassign it the value of Chuck, and the computer is saying, absolutely not, you're not allowed to do that. And so that's why we want to use let and const instead of var, because they're more descriptive in what they allow you to do. So this is a value that cannot be reassigned, and this is a value that can be reassigned. All right, so, and then, and when we say redeclared, so you can only declare a variable once. So if, let's comment this out. So now I don't get this error anymore. And I say, let age equal 32. Right. So now identifier age has already been declared, and that will hold true for const as well. So if I try and do const first name, and even if I try and give it the same value, let's see here. So override scope to even if you bracket code, it will be global. Or no, var, I'm not aware that var overrides scope. Your scope is controlled by where you place it inside, what level of your code that you place it at. And we'll talk about scope. I think we cover that like in session 3 or 4. Yes. Let's see here. Is that better for everyone?
Yeah, that's good for me.
Cool. Yeah. And if there's anything else, like I said, can you read this when I put it back into presentation mode? This is good enough size for everyone.
Oh yeah, it's perfect.
Yes.
And I did drop it as a PDF into the Slack chat, so you can always pull it up and follow along whatever size you need. Okay, so again, talking about replit, that's what we were just looking at here. So let, const, and var are keywords that let you initially declare named variables, right? So this is one line of code, sorry, but this is actually 2 different actions, right? So this is instantiating my variable. This is assigning it a value, because the same thing, I could do this as well. Right, so I've instantiated first name, and I have not assigned it a value, right? So delete this. Oh. So this is missing initializer and const declaration. I might not be able to do it with const. How about let? There we go. So this is a undefined variable. So I have instantiated it. I have not assigned a value for it. And so when I print it out, it just tells me undefined. Now I'm doing this, right? And now we'll get Charles again. But I can also do this. Right? So I can do this in 2 lines and I get the same thing. I'm still getting Charles here. So this is one action. This is instantiating. This is assigning. Most languages will allow you to do the shorthand of instantiation and assignment at the exact same time. All right. Here. And so current year is just the variable name. It's a label. You must give variables a name. Variable names cannot begin with a number. So they can have a number in them. They can end with a number, but they cannot. So like you could not do like the number 2 Earth gravity, right? Like that variable name won't read. And then this is the value. So outputting a variable's value, we covered this, just the console.log method. And so when I had not assigned a value yet, we get the undefined. When I assign, and that's what's being put to the console. Once something is assigned, it'll put out what you have as the variable when you do it. And this is called string interpolation. And we did a little bit of that already as well. All right. Any questions about variables before we move to data types?
Is there any moment where it would be more beneficial to put it, the variable or the define on a separate line instead of like one single line?
It's a style thing. And yes, in certain instances it is, because let's say, and again, we're at the very basic level here, but what if I don't know the name that's going to be assigned yet? Right. So I can just say that I can create a variable saying that I know I'm going to need a first name, but I have 50 different first names to choose from. So I don't need to. So basically, I'll just create the variable saying, okay, I know I'm going to need a placeholder for a first name. Now I'm going to run my program that randomly picks one of 50 first names and then assigns it to that variable that I created up above. And there's different ways to tackle that, but that would be one reason why you do it, is because you don't know the actual value you're going to put in that variable. You just know that you're going to need that value eventually.
Kind of like a placeholder, you would say?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay.
It's a placeholder.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, and so we've got our first visitor of class. This is Mo. So you'll see his tail going back and forth. So all right, so data types. So we'll do, sorry, I keep saying so data types, basics. Numbers are, so let age equal 34, and we did that already. Strings, first name, there's different ways. So double quotes, single quotes are the exact same thing. Most of these will be set by a style guide. You can use either one generically, especially at this level. As you get into using frameworks or other opinionated code writing, they may want you to use double quotes in certain situations and single quotes in different situations. Backticks are used to create string literals, and we'll get into those. Just know that all 3 of these will look the same when you put them to the console, but when you use backticks, you only use them in certain situations where you're going to do inline string interpolation and create what we call a string literal. Don't worry if you're not sure what that is. We'll cover that more. Booleans, true or false value. So a Boolean is either true or false. True and false are very important in software development because that's how we help the computer make decisions. Some of the earlier challenges that we do will typically have like maybe one thing where we need to do true or false. When we get into more complex logic, there literally can be parts of code that can have dozens and dozens of true or false operators that are broken up that as a piece of information flows through your program. Depending on the specifics of that information or that data, it's going to take different paths through the program. Let's see. So undefined is a variable that has been declared, but no value has been assigned. So I demonstrated that. And then null means there is explicitly no value. So undefined is not the same as null. They both mean that something is not there, but undefined means that no one's put anything there yet. Null is explicitly saying that there is nothing there. Arrays. So with arrays, a list-like object that stores values, we declare arrays with square brackets, and we use them to hold pieces of information. So let's go ahead and grab this one. Oops, sorry. Let's grab this whole line. Right. And, oh, of course it does. Doesn't like the stylistic quotes coming there. So okay, so if I console.log techcos to the console, anyone want to take a stab at what I'm going to get?
I don't think anything because you haven't defined the index.
Okay, so
Base?
you are on the right track, but so you're a step ahead. So if I do not define the index, I should get the whole thing.
Okay.
Right. And now we hadn't explicitly mentioned index yet, but arrays take information and they store them in order. And so if I print this out a billion times, these will print out in the exact same order every single time. They have an assigned order. They have an index position. And so if I ask someone to count to 5, someone just unmute and count to 5 for me.
0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Well, technically you counted to 6, so you were half clever. And what I was going to illustrate, and you're dead on, is that humans start counting at 1. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Computers start counting at 0. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And so one of the early hurdles learning to write software is being able to switch back and forth between human counting and computer counting. All right, so there's 4 objects, or there's 4 elements inside this array. Google has the first index position, which is 0. And so if I give techcos a index of 0, now I would expect to see that I'm only going to get Google, right? And if I want the last thing, so element 3, now I only get Tesla. And so we access the information inside an array by their index position. And this array is an elementary data structure, very important. We're going to use a ton of them in this class. And we can add things to the array. We can remove things from the array. We can ask the array questions about itself. So I know that I have 4 items inside this array, but if I had 4 million items inside this array, it would be harder for me to figure out exactly how many things are in here. However, I can use what's called a built-in, which is a built-in method or function that does basically a common useful performance for me. And let's see, it's not going to give me there. Okay, so count retrieves the number of records matching the given key or key range in a query. A successful request result in the count. Let's do this. Oh, I don't need to make it a function call. Oh, see, so I told you I'd screw things up. JS count of array. Sorry, dot length. Dot count is Ruby, which is what I've been writing code in for the last few months. So if we change this to dot length, gets or sets the length of the array. This is a number 1 higher than the highest index in the array, right? So the highest index is 3. So I would expect that the length of my array is 4, right? And there's my 4. So it said, and this will work regardless of how many elements are in the array. It should include every element. So even if I just do something like this, I would think there's there. So it basically everything that has an index. So even though this won't do a whole lot, right? So if I say 4 now or 5, which is going to be calling that element, right? And I'm just getting an empty space there, it does still count as something. Counts, and that maybe, but I was thinking count because like if I was looking at an array in Ruby, it's dot count instead of dot length. So for those of you that do end up going to Code Platoon or another boot camp where they start throwing 2 languages at you at the same time, where you'll do a challenge in JavaScript, and then you'll turn right back around the next day and do the exact same challenge and still solve it in Python. The first couple of weeks, you're going to write a lot of broken code where your brain will like kick back to JavaScript while you're trying to write Python and vice versa. It's just something that happens. It's a lot of stuff to juggle. All right, and all of these different things. So array methods, pre-built function included in JavaScript. So length, pop, push, shift, unshift, index of, splice, all do different things to our array. So if I say, let's see here, techcos.pop, right, removes the last element from the array and returns it. If the array is empty, undefined is returned and the array is not modified. So let's go ahead and delete our 2 empty values here. And so I'll do a couple of things here real quick. So now I only have 4 items in here and I'm asking for the 5th index position. It doesn't exist anymore. So it's just automatically going to tell me undefined. Right. And now if I get rid of my index and I want to see the whole array again, notice that Tesla is gone. So pop removes the last element. And I believe it is like shift will remove the first element. Right, so now Google and Tesla have both removed. Now, these actions remove them from the array. The array has been modified. They're not in there anymore. But if I don't do anything with these disappear right after this line of code is ran. So what I can do is if I need Google for some reason, I can say, or Tesla, I can say, let that. And now I can say this, and there's Tesla. So I've taken Tesla out of the array and I've saved it to its own value or to its own variable as a string, right? And so this is manipulating my array. So index of, I believe, will return the index number. And so with all of this, and notice how as I'm typing these things in, right, so I can say, do tech pose index of, so returns the index of the first occurrence of a value in an array, or -1 if it's not present, the value. And so we can say all basically in all of these different options that we have in here. So same thing if I do Apple here. And so again, here's another great example. We'll go ahead and do this. When we run this, nothing happens. So even though this is a function, nothing's happening. I still have to tell the console that I want to log this information to it, right? So that's in the one position. And what that is that Google has been removed, Tesla has been removed. So now Facebook is in the 0 index position, and Apple is in the second index position, which is the index of 1.
So even if they are removed by those push and pop function or shift and pop functions, they don't change index values.
They do, because if I comment these lines out,
Oh, never. I see. Yeah, never mind.
right? So now Apple's the third item, which is the second index. Again, and do not worry about this. This will, like, it is super easy to trip up on the difference between index counting and human counting. And it still will haunt you for years down the road. All right. And the same way where we use pop and shift, we can use push and unshift, and those will add additional values into the array. Another great resource is MDM, which is the Mozilla Developer Network. So Mozilla, the maintainers of Firefox. Highly recommend that if you need to look up how to do something like, oh, I thought I could do this with an array, or I thought I could do this with a string, I'm not sure. Always try and get that information from MDN first, just because they are kind of like the source of truth in the universe. And I'm not saying that you won't find good answers elsewhere, but you'll always find the most up-to-date answer here. And we were just looking at a couple of different like array built-ins, but here is the full list of all the different built-ins that you can do, right? And I can say, hey, how did I like remove something off an array? And so I can say, okay, shift, here it is, here's an example, here's the full description of what it does, some more examples, and so on and so forth, like very in-depth explanations. And then not so much our concern at this point, but it does have browser compatibility as well. So here is, like, and you'll see me pull this up all the time when something's not working the way I think it should be as a built-in. Like, I'm always going to come back here and check for the answer. And this is just MDN web doc. So like do a Google search like MDN array or MDN object or MDN string or MDM.split, and like it'll take you to exactly what you're looking for. So, all right. So the next data type is an object, and objects are some of the more, probably one of the more complex data structures that you'll work with as a developer. Whereas a array has an index, objects do not have indices, they have basically key value pairs. So everything inside of a object is a key value pair. And we can access information inside here. And I guess I should also be explicit in JavaScript, because it's dynamic. Other languages, you have to say this is an array of strings or this is an array of integers. Or like in Java, you have to specify exactly how long an array is, and you can't add and remove elements from it. It always has to stay the same length. But with this, I can add a Boolean value. I can add an integer. I can add a float. Right? All of these things are valid values inside of an array. And I can then turn around and access those by their index value. Right? So when I look in the 5th index, that's index 4. This is index 5. It returns the integer 19. Right? Now, in a object, and you also, I guess, to continue to go that, I can also do this. Right? And now the last element in my array is another array. I can also add a object to my array. And so an array can hold all of these different types of data. And it's the same thing for an object. We've got a string, we've got an integer. I can take and do this. Right, and so now we've got a where are we going? Expected a colon. Where did you expect a colon? Okay, I'll get to that here in a second. But we can basically store different types of data in each of these data structures. Comma, you yell at me. Sorry, because I did this as an object. I need my key value pair there. That's sloppy. I'll just do that. And now if I want to look at tech companies again, and so this is the 5th, so I need 6th, 7th, the 7th item, or the 7th element in my array. When I run this, I get the whole array. Now, if I only want the value 3, what I can do is start extending out and adding additional box notation here. So when you see the 2 brackets, people will call it bracket notation or box notation, right? And so now I've taken the 7th element of this array, which is an array, and then I've grabbed the thing at index position 2, so the 3rd element inside the array, and that's how I get to that number 3 there. So I dug into this array, and then I dug even deeper into this array. Now, same thing here, I can also do this, right? And well, I got undefined. Let's see here. Because I'm still on 7. I need to switch that to 8. Right, and let's comment that out. So there's Charles. To differentiate it. right? So now I've gone into my array, tech companies. I've grabbed the item at the 8th index position, which is an object, and then I use the key of that object to basically identify the value that I want to print out to my console. Same thing down here. If I look at employee, right? So I can say console.log employee. And when I do this, just like an array, if I do just the name, like the whole variable name without any type of key to identify further information, I get the entire object, right? And so now along the same lines, I can do pets, right? And now I get the entire object. So I have an object inside my object, which gives me a key of names and a value of different pet names, right? And so I can do keep going and say names, right? And now I've just got the names, the array, and let's say that I want Todd, which is in the 1 index position, right? And so now I've gone into the employee object, I've looked at the pets, I've looked at the names of the pets, and then I've looked at the second element, which is the 1 index position of the contained pets, and I've printed out that name, right? And don't worry if this is all confusing right now, because this is the first of many, many times that we're going to do this exact same thing here over the next 3 weeks. This is a core concept. This is basically manipulating data structures to retrieve stored information. And it's one of the core components of software development. And we're going to do this over and over and over again. And if you go to a coding boot camp, you're going to keep going and keep going. You become a software developer. This is what I do all day long, is figure out how to get information out of my database or send information to my database and store it correctly, and then retrieve it at a later time and then display it on a web page for a user to basically make sense of it and do their day job. All right, those were array, like the basics, and then arrays and objects. Feel free to throw out any questions that you have, and I'm going to review the chat here as well. And I'll also say this to everyone: don't worry about sounding silly. There's no dumb questions. And I can almost guarantee you, if you're curious about the question, at least one other person in the class wants to know the answer to it as well. So throw it out there.
So if I do console.log employee, how do I get rid of the brackets and make it kind of like readable as if, like, you know, you would regularly see it, if that makes sense?
Right. And so once we start drilling for information, right? So let's go ahead and I'll do this as a multi-step process. So let's go ahead and say let favorite pet equal this, and let's say let employee name equal employee name, and let employee salary equal employee salary. And so we'll delete this out of here. Oops. And so remember, I said that single quotes and double quotes are about the same, but backticks are a little bit different. And up here, I did this as single quotes, right? So I did single quote for name, and then add the variable name, and then add the string age with the spacing and add age. When I use backticks and I create a string literal, it allows me to do inline string interpolation. So what I can do is, now that I'm in backtick, so that's single quotes, this is backticks, I can do $, and then brackets, and anything that is in here is treated like actual JavaScript code instead of like a string. So this is saying what is the variable employee name, which is going to be the name of the employee. So if I run this now and I console.log it, even though it looks like it just says employee name here, right? I get Ruthie Cohen. Now, again, if I delete the backticks and I just make this either single or double quotes, it's actually, this is just treated as a string, like nothing special happens here. So let's change this back to backticks, and I can say employee name makes per year and spends the bulk of it on her favorite pet. Right, and so now when I run this, Ruthie Cohen makes 50,000 per year and spends the bulk of it on her favorite pet, Todd. Right, and now this is very simple, and this is just to make this easier to read, because I don't need to declare these variables. I could just do this. Right, and this will do the exact same thing. Let's comment that out. Right, and so it's the same thing. But let's say if I had to write a paragraph with 50 different things about Ruthie, this would get very hard to read if I didn't give it readable names. Or if the data was really what we call, so this is called nesting. So when we put data objects inside other data objects, that is a nested data object. And same thing, like we could make it more complex. So we could say inside pets, we could say names, or do something like bring this back out to this specifically an object, but make this an array, and then say pet 1, right, and then do name and age. Right, and so we can keep going and going and going and digging in further and further and further, and then what you do is you end up with something that looks like this. Right, and now if we have all of this piled in here, it becomes unreadable. So what we do is we use this to compartmentalize and sort our data as we go. And this either way works. This is just like a kind of like a tip at that point. So let me go ahead and undo the nonsense I typed. All right, and then also I didn't explain it, but one of the other things that we can do is write clean code that, so I can write something like this, and this works, and I can add extra spaces, and I can add a space here, and notice I'm not getting any red lines, there's no errors here. Like I can do this, right, but this isn't as easy to read. So what this does is, this is called linting. This is going to format my code for me. So when I click this, it's going to help clean up some of it. It's not going to clean up all of it. Some of it I can do manually, right? But this is much easier to read than when I had all of the weird spacing in there. All right, so when you're adding the quotations, is that just the, yeah, it's literally, it's the backtick right next to the enter key underneath the double, or I'm sorry, I'm thinking of well, I don't know what I was thinking, but the backtick is at the top left hand underneath the tilde.
Yeah, I was just talking about like that, the shortcut. So you highlight the word and then you got the quotations on both sides.
Oh, so that is Yes, so that is again the benefit of an IDE, right? Like so in Microsoft Word, right, when you highlight something and then you hit another character, you replace it, right? And with an IDE, if you highlight something and you hit like another character, it'll replace it. But if you hit a wrapping character, so quotes, brackets, curly braces, something like that, it's smart enough to know that you actually want to wrap those in the wrapping item. Right. And so all you have to do is highlight something and hit one of those. Right. And so that's like the combo breaker, like brackets don't get recognized, like the angle braces don't get recognized, but quotes, single quotes, right, all of those things will automatically wrap whatever text you have highlighted. Right. Like if I wanted to turn this whole thing into a string, right? So now the whole thing's a string. Also, command on a Mac, and if you guys, sorry, used PCs my whole life until I became a software developer, and now it's all Macs. If you hear me say the word command, it's basically control on a PC. If I don't explicitly say it, but the /, so on a Mac command on a PC control, / inside your replet will comment your code out for you. Right. So when commented code is this, and you can also do the manual, just the 2 slashes will also do it. But if you're trying to comment out multiple lines of code at the same time, you can highlight them, hit this, and it automatically does all of the lines for you at the same time. And it's an easy way to comment, uncomment your code out. And that will be useful as you're working through problems that you need to, like something's not working and you don't necessarily want to delete it and lose it for forever, but you just want to get it out of the way while you try something else. You'll be commenting and uncommenting code out quite a bit. And also at the end of class in the Slack workspace, I will post all of my scratch notes and then all of the challenges that we do on that evening in the Slack space so that you can refer back to them. All right. Any other questions? Commenting multiple lines is just highlighting multiple lines at the same time and then hitting Command or Control /. And if you don't have multiple lines, it just does whatever line you're on. But if you highlight multiple, it grabs all of them at the same time. And then up here, this is your code formatting. So if you write sloppy code, we have extra spaces, you don't have your spaces, this kind of standardizes. So I recommend definitely, like if you're going to ask for help, before you copy and paste code into Slack, hit this button. But just to help keep things rolling in the right direction and make it as easy as possible for you to read it. It doesn't cost any money to hit this button, so hit it often. Are you in Replit?
Did you highlight it?
You shouldn't have to highlight it. So it looks like it's saying Control K or Control C. Well, and it says Control / right here to toggle line comment. And here I will drop this into the chat. And here's a whole bunch of all right. All right, so we're good. All right. Any other questions about data types before I move on? Okay. Yeah. So we'll talk about that here real quick too. Let me just make sure we're on track. We've got about 52 minutes left. Like I said, there's a lot of me running my mouth the first night, so I apologize for that. Yeah, so when dumping code into Slack, I'll just demonstrate this here real quick. Right, so we can do things. Oops, yeah, that. And grab you. Oh, let's just grab all of this. All right. So in Slack, if you are adding code, you just hit the paste, right? Like you get this, and this is not great. It's not super readable. The up arrow will bring you to previous messages. If you hit E on an existing message, it is for edit. 3 backticks will create a code block. And you will get code that looks like this. This is much easier to read. If you are just writing a single line of code, a single backtick, we'll highlight it like this. And then if you have a large piece of code, you can do / and start to type in snippet. And you can do a text snippet, but with a text snippet, you can detect languages. And it'll take a second to create it. Shouldn't take this long. Did I do something wrong? Nope, there it went. And then it will eventually actually add color linting to this. It takes a minute for the server to take care of all of it. But this will turn into like color code, just like when we're looking at it on RepNet. We can come back and check on it. So making your code easy to read when you're asking for help makes life a lot easier, right? So like this is a little bit more difficult. You can see like Guillermo was responding with a screenshot, which isn't great either because like you can't copy and paste this. But yeah, the more you can do to make it easier. So like this is great. Yazid was in, I think he's in one of the current cohorts, and he went through the coding prep, the last one. So like he's dropping code in here in a code block. That's perfect. Like that's what we like to see. Right. And no one's gonna yell at you, but if it's really unreadable or like it's really hard to make out what's going on, someone may ask you to copy and paste it back into a code block. Right. And again, that was just triple backtick, single backtick, and then / snippet if you want. And because I think there's like a 2,000 or 3,000 character limit with any specific comment or message that you send on Slack. So some of these longer files, it'll say this file is too long, and it just cuts it off. And whereas a snippet, like you can take thousands of lines of code if you want to and drop it into one snippet because it actually is saving it as a file. All right. Yeah, no worries. Okay, so next step is operators. All right, this is where we get into conditional logic. Operators are going to be your basic math. So I'm sorry, I said conditional logic too soon. Ignore that. We're just going to be talking about operators, and then we'll get into that down the road. And so easily confused with comparison operators. Equal is used to assign something. Double equal and triple equal are equality and strict equality. So this is very different than these two things. And what this is doing is assigning the value 7 to the variable equality. If I do this, it's going to throw an error and say that a comma was expected. But this is actually saying, is the number 7 equal to the variable equality? And because the variable equality has not been assigned anything yet, it's gonna throw an error. You can't do this comparator while instantiating a variable. So now I could say, let equality equal 7, console.log equality, run it. Oops, cannot read, undefined, reading 1, index line 27. Oh, so that doesn't exist. And let's do this. All right, so that's the number 7. Now, if I say is equality equal to 7, that returns a true. And if I said 8, that would return a false. All right, and we'll talk more about the conditional logic and equality coming up, but that's just, this is not the same thing as this. They do very different things. All right, addition is just a plus sign, subtraction is a minus sign, multiplication is an asterisk. The exponent is the double asterisk, right? So 3 asterisk 2 is going to be 6, and then 3 asterisk asterisk 2 is going to be 3 to the second power, which is 9, unless I forgot math, which is a 50-50. And then division is just the / for the divisor. Now this, and I put this here because this can throw people off. A lot of times this gets referred to as a modulo or a modulus operator. And in a lot of programming languages, it is. In JavaScript, it is the remainder, right? So 10, and I may slip and say like 10 modulo 3. If you say it, people will generally understand what you're talking about, but it's 10 remainder 3. So 3 goes into 10 3 times 9 with a remainder of 1 left over, right? So if I did 10 remainder 2, the 2 goes into 10 evenly 5 times, and the remainder would be 0, right? If I did 10 remainder 4, it goes in 2 times and has a remainder of 2. And so, and that's all this does. All right. So logic operators, and now here's where we start getting into logic operators, or what we refer to as conditional operators. Equal and strict equal. So if A is equal to 4 and B is equal to 2, right? A is not equal to B, right? That would be false. So 4 is not equal to 2. Now remember, we talked about the bang operator, and the bang operator reverses the polarity of your conditional logic. So what we're saying is that, is it true that 4 is not equal to 2? And that is true. 4 is not equal to 2. So we can take a look at that back over here. Right. So when we do this, this is true. But if I do this, it's now false. So because what I'm asking is equality not equal to 7? And equality is equal to 7. So this basically resolves to the Boolean false. Right. And another thing, I kind of glossed over this, but everything in a computer language resolves to something else. So when I read this line, right, I say, is equality, we'll make it simple here, double equal to 7. The computer isn't looking to see if equality is double equal to 7. The computer is basically going, okay, what is equality? Well, equality is 7. It's assigned the value of 7, and is 7 equal to 7? Yes. So this is, so the computer sees this, goes back, grabs this, plugs it in right here, and then tells me, are these two things equal to each other? And that is the case. All right. And so same thing, if I do this, that's the same as saying this, and that would be false. So this is true. This is false. Right. And now, I'm going to throw another wrinkle in this, is equality and strict equality. All right. So equality just checks that the value is the same. Strict equality checks that the type is the same. So let's go ahead and do this once. Let's do string equality and say 7. All right. And now when I do this, I get true, right? Because at the end of the day, both of this is a string and this is an integer. They're different types, but they house the same value. And so this is true. You typically want to avoid using non-strict equality, because if you're trying to write a program that works with numbers and somebody throws a string in here and you're comparing, you'll get past this part, but eventually this will break when you try and add something to it. Right? So let's take a look at this. So if I say console.log equality plus 10, what do we think we're going to see in the console? 17 in the chat. Yep, we get 17. So what happens when I do this? Anyone want to take a stab at what we're going to see now? Shouldn't get an error.
Just say 7 plus 10.
Yeah, Jason got it. We're going to get 710. And because what we're going to do is JavaScript's going to change this over to a string, and you can add strings together. Right? So there's 710, which is the same thing as basically doing this. Right? This also gives me 710. So these two things, like, you may pass the part of the program where it says that these are equal, but then you're going to get to another part of the program where eventually this is going to break and give you output that you're not expecting. So what we always want to do is try and catch problems as early as possible. So we almost always want to use strict equality. We always want to use the triple equals. And then what we're going to see is that's false, because now we're saying this is the integer 7. Is this the integer 7? It is not. It is the string 7. So now we get a false. And then we would hope that our software would reject it, and it saves us from ever getting further in the program where we end up with an issue like this. All right. Does it always default to the string conversion instead of string to integer? Yes, it always will massage the string into an integer. Sorry, it will always convert the integer into a string. And so we've got greater than and less than, which work just like they do in standard math. And then greater than or equal to and less than or equal to, again, same thing as standard math there. You just don't have the line underneath. It's just the angles and the equal sign. Okay, so these are a little different. Now we have sorry, can you use the bang in front of the other operators to do the same thing? Yes, you should be able to, right? So can we say, so we could do something like this. console.log is 7 greater than 5. Right, and we get that true there. And I think we should be able to do that. Well, I guess you can't. And the reason would be is that you don't necessarily need to reverse the polarity. You would just do this. Right, and so now we get the false. So yeah, I guess the bang is just with the strict not equal and not equal. And I'd never tried that before, but there's our answer. And all right, so back to here. So we also have logical and logical or. So let's go ahead and take a look at these examples, and I'll throw some in the replit as well. So what we're saying here is with and, everything has to be true or it is false. With or, only one thing has to be true out of many. So if we look at this example, we have let A equal 4, let B equal 2, C equal 8. So is A greater than 2, or I'm sorry, is 4 greater than 2? That is true. And then is 2 less than 8? That is also true. So this resolves to true and true. So we get true. Now with this one, is 4 greater than 8? That is false. Is 4 greater than 2? That is true. So we have one false and one true. Because they're not both true, that would resolve to false. Now, the exact same combos down here, true and true, will give us true. But with the or operator, this is false and this is true. Only one of them have to be true. So it's basically saying, is this true or is this one true? Yes, that is true. This one is saying, is this true and is this true? They both have to be true. All right. And as you start to use these, we'll throw the wrong ones in all the time. Like we'll use an and when we should have used an or vice versa. It's just, again, exposure and practice. So let's go ahead and throw this in here real quick. So, and with both of these, so I can say console log, right? True. Right, gives me true. And if I say true and true, I get true. And if I change this to a false, I get false. And it doesn't matter if there's something else true after it, right? I still get false. And it doesn't matter if there's a million trues here. If there's one false, when I'm using an and, then the whole thing's going to resolve to false. Now, with or, I only need one thing to be true to get true, right? And so I can say false, false, right? And I still get true because one of them returned true. And where it can get complicated, right, is I can say this. Right, and so now I've nested my conditional logic. So this is saying return true if either one of these are true, but only return true if the resolution of this and this are true. And I'm making it oversimplified by just using straight Boolean values, but I could say is 4 greater than 2, is 2 equal 5, and then is 5 not equal to 5, right? And this should give me false. Right, there's my false. Now, if I get rid of this, I should get true. Right, so even though this is false, right, I'm saying this can be true or this can be true. They don't both have to be true, but then one of these has to be true, and then this has to be true if I want to get true at the end of the day, right? And so this is where conditional logic can get very complex, and we can start going down very lengthy decision trees where there's 20 or 30 different outcomes for a piece of information that's presented at the top of the tree. And then we have to say, well, is this true? Is this true? Is this true? And then as each of those things change, it goes to a different part of the program for different processing. Any questions about operators? Anyone?
So the and is, it makes it like perfectly true or false, and then the or has like an exception to where if like even if one's false, one can be true.
Yes.
Okay.
So and is saying so another way to put it is the first part of the logic is true and the second part of the logic is true. And this is saying the first part of the logic is true or second part of the logic is true. All right, so and is saying they both have to be true, or is saying one or the other has to be true.
Gotcha. Appreciate it.
Yep. All right, functions. So this is where we will, so again, this is where I may lose some people, and we're almost to the end of the night here. I probably won't do built-in methods tonight. I'll start off with the built-ins in session 2, because basically like session 2 is just the REPL intro and the formatting and clean code, which will only take a couple of minutes because we've already done the REPL intro. So we'll make it through functions and probably through control flow tonight. And then we'll kick off with iteration, built-in methods, and problem solving on Wednesday. Okay. Let's go down here. All right, so for functions, what are functions? Functions use case, they're reusable blocks of code that perform a specific set of instructions that you define or that are built into the language. Functions can be defined to accept 0 or more inputs, or what we refer to as parameters, and in most cases output or return a value. To declare a new function, use the function keyword followed by the name of the function, which is the old way of doing things. And I will also show you the new way of doing things, which is called a fat arrow function. And then when a return statement is encountered, the function exits immediately, returning the return value. All right, so this right here is where a lot of people get tripped up, and I did as well when I was learning to write software. Returning a value is different than logging to the console. And I'll show you what we have to do here. All right, does anyone want to take a stab at what this function does? It's a very basic function.
Pretty much returns the math that you do on parameter 1 and parameter 2, if the values are there.
Yep. So it looks like this is just adding, right? So like we're adding two numbers together. we could be doing other parameters, but we're just going to assume that we're adding two numbers together here. Right. And so let's go ahead and copy this and we'll drop this over here. All right. And so let's go ahead and change the name of this to add. All right. And instead of parameter one, we'll say num1. Probably multi-highlight and num2. Right. And so now this becomes a little bit more explicit. When I look at this function, instead of just having to kind of guess like, hey, I'm gonna add two values together, but I don't know if I'm concatenating a string or whatever else is going on. When I look at this, I have a better idea that I'm going to be adding two numbers together and returning the value. So as we said, a computer comes in, starts at the first line of your code and starts reading it. And it reads it from the top to the bottom. And right now, if I run this, even though I have a function here, let me just go ahead and get rid of some of my console.logs. Okay, so I get nothing, right? So the reason being is because the computer got to line 52 and said, here's a function. It's called add. It takes in two parameters, which are num1 and num2. It looks like it's going to add those two numbers together, and then it's going to return a value, which is basically the sum of those two numbers. However, nowhere yet have I told my computer to do anything with add, right? So here is my function. I need a function call. And to call a function, right? So I type in add, says here's a function, num1, any, num2, any. So that's just saying they can be any type. And I say 5 and 5. So if I look at this, I'm calling add with 5 and 5. So this turns into add 5 and 5. This turns into let value equal 5 plus 5, which is going to be 10. And then we're going to return the value of 10. So now when I hit run, nothing happens, right? Did my function return anything? Yes, it did. However, returning something out of a function does not mean that I am printing it to the console. So if I do this, right, and right, so there's my 10. So now I'm console.logging value, which is 5 plus 5 of 10. However, and this is useful for something like this. However, when you're writing actual software, almost nothing gets logged to the console. The only time you do console.log is when you are trying to troubleshoot the issues that you're having with your software, and you need to see something that's out of place with that. Now, so what we'll do, and for our purposes in this class, we still want to return. And what we'll do is take this down here, our function call, and we'll wrap that in a console.log, right? And so we still get that same 10. And let's demonstrate this once real quick. If I don't return anything out of here, what do we think is going to happen up here?
Nothing.
Not nothing, close. It's
Undefined.
what's that?
Undefined.
Yep, we're going to get
Undefined.
right, because this never returns anything and it just resolves into an undefined value. So there's undefined. So we always want to return out of our functions. And if we need to see what we're returning in the console, we just need to take our function call and wrap it in a console.log statement. All right, so function declaration. So we just talked about this. So function name, parameter, caller invoking a function to execute the instructions or task, pass any arguments, right? So this is calling your function or invoking your function. I'll refer to it as a function call. Sorry, Chad, with your question, what would return what you input for param 1, 2 and store it in a name. Let's see here. I'm sorry. It looks like that was from a few minutes ago. Okay, no problem. And let's see here. All right. So what are functions? There are three ways to declare a function. This is the regular function. This is probably the most common way you'll see it in class. I usually use this. These things, all three of these things do the exact same thing. Anonymous function, I don't use as often. This is considered the most modern way of doing it, but all three of them do the same way. And really it just comes down to a stylistic choice and which one you are most comfortable with. But know that this does the same thing as this, as does the same thing as this. It's just different ways of doing it. I'll usually write them this way. If you're comfortable doing it this way already, start stepping out of your comfort zone and doing it this way. And if you're not comfortable doing it anyway, just start right this way from the beginning. It's the most modern way of doing it. And so,
Quick question, Charles, if you don't mind. So I noticed on the Coder Bytes challenges for the application, it uses the ES5 version, the first one, the regular. Would it be okay to make it ES6 or just leave it as is and kind of function on that ES5?
I wouldn't delete anything that's boilerplate on any of those. And again, it's just stylistic. I mean, if people want me to write it the ES5 way, I can. I tend to flip back and forth. I can do it twice. And it's a quick change. So I can say, oops. All right, and notice how I skipped the assignment out and I'm just returning the actual the actual operation, which will resolve to 10. And so I can do add 2 instead of add. And I still get my 10 there, right? And so this thing does the exact same thing as this thing. This is just considered the modern way of doing it. If you see it written somewhere else already, and you can change it if you want to. On the application in CoderByte, I don't know that it would screw up the scoring or not. So maybe just leave that. But either one of these are completely valid. I'm not going to tell you one way is better than the other. All right, control flow. And so this is where we start to get into if and else statements and else if statements in JavaScript. And for whatever reason, every single language has to do it slightly differently. There's always an if and an else, but in JavaScript, it's really easy. It's else if. Like, I mean, you can't even remember what it is in Python, but like in Ruby, it's elif, it's ELIF. And so having to remember all the different ways to write else if is just the curse of being a software developer. And what this is doing is we're going to start using our comparative logic to tell the computer to perform one set of instructions or a different set of instructions based on the information that is presented to it, right? An if statement is the most basic. So let me do this. So I can say, right, and so when I run this, I get hi Todd. And if I change this to just Toddy, right, nothing happened because it came, the computer read this line, said cat is equal to Toddy. Then it read this line and said, well, if cat, which is now Toddy, is triple equal to Todd, do this. Else, just keep going and there's no other instructions. Right, and so now I can provide it an alternate set of instructions Right, and where this becomes an issue is that now Todd is hi Todd. Any other value I put in here is you are not Todd, which is correct. And so we could do something like this, right? We all met Mo tonight, so Mo is not Todd. Well, I can add an else if statement saying right? And so now we've got two different points of data that we can work with. So if we get Todd, we can say, hi, Todd. If it's Mo, we'll say sup Mo. And if it's any other value besides those two, then we fall into our else case, right? Where you are not Todd. And we could even update this. So you are not Todd or Mo. And that would go for any value that we feed it, except for, well, I'm sorry, any value that you feed it. And so like, even if I say, change this to an integer, right? Like we're 13 is not equal to Todd, 13 is not equal to Mo. So we end up down here. And so this is just doing string comparison. We could do, right, if I gave my cat serial numbers, right? So Todd is cat number 13. That's greater than number 10. So we've got hi Todd, and Mo is cat number 8, right? And so if we say 8, right, we get sup Mo. Now, where we have an issue and where we have to be careful with conditional logic is, let's say that Mo has a serial number of 15. What do we think we're going to get here, right? Right, Chad's got it. We're going to get hi Todd, because we're going to hit, well, actually, I think we should get, yeah, we'll just stop here. Right, hi Todd, and because it hit the first true case, right? So is, even if Mo is 15, 15 is greater than 10. So we say hi Todd. And so if I wanted to make this correct, right, I could say, oops. Yeah. We just basically have to make sure that we put everything in the correct order. Right, so now we say hi Mo, cat is, or Todd is cat number 13, right? And so we skip past that and we get to it's greater than 10. So we say sup Todd. And so conditional logic, and will, and again, cannot stress this enough. All of this is free. I will watch people write code, and they'll write lines and lines of code, and they will never hit the run button. And it doesn't cost you a quarter every time you hit the run button. Like there's no account, there's no credit check here. Hit that run button like it's a YouTube subscribe button, and smash it as often as you want to. And because it's very important that if there's an issue and you write 50 lines of code, would you rather find an issue in 50 lines of code, or would you rather find it in 3 lines of code? Right, so we write our 3 lines of code, we run, it looks good, we move on to the next step, we run, it looks good, instead of writing and writing and writing and then hitting run and getting an error, and then having to fix that error and then we hit run again, and then we see another error in our code. And then we end up having to chase down a bunch of different errors through our error messages that were basically predicated upon each other. So always fail fast, fail quick, hit that run button as often as you can. Yes, exactly. Coding masochism. Embrace the pain. All right, so that is conditional logic. It is 8:48. I will hit iteration tonight. There's only 2 slides there. And well, actually, maybe we will finish this tonight. So, well, and I guess I should say with control flow, any questions before I move into iteration?
Instead of like console.log after each statement, could you just like use return hi Todd or return hi Mo? Like, do you have to console.log after each one?
So in the way that I wrote it, yes, because I am not inside a function here. But we could absolutely make this a function and then return it. So we could say let oops. Let's, if we're going to do this, let's make this more realistic. Okay, so now same thing here. If I just run this, I get nothing. And so I need to call or invoke my function, which I just called here kitty. And now here kitty takes one parameter, which is cat, and cat gets fed through here, and it looks like we're comparing strings. So I can say Todd. And when I run this, again, still nothing happens because I'm returning the basically the string sup Todd out of here. And so if I wrap this and do a console.log here, there we go. And now this becomes reusable, right? Before each time, like when it was just an if statement up here in the file, and I had to basically delete the value of cat and reassign it. Now with now that it's encapsulated in a function, it's reusable. Right. And so what I'm doing is I'm calling this function with the value Todd, and then I'm calling the function with the value Mo, and then I'm calling the function a third time with the value Nugget. Right. And so we get sup Todd, hi Mo, you are not Todd or Mo. Right. And so that is why we write things in functions, is so that they become reusable and we can use them over and over again in different parts of our application. Did that help?
Yes.
Awesome. Any other questions with this? No. It should say that it doesn't exist. There is a concept of hoisting in JavaScript, which we'll get into in a later class, that talks about basically hoisting everything up to the top level. But let's see here. I believe this should throw an error, but I've been wrong before. Two. Right, so, oops, that's that. Cannot access here kitty before initialization, right? So basically I'm saying, because again, we read from top to bottom, the computer gets to here and says, okay, I want to look at here kitty. It doesn't know about anything whatsoever after line 66. So it's confused. It's only looking up above this line. All right. Anything else? Okay, so it's 8:55 now. So I won't start iteration tonight. We'll launch off with iteration on Wednesday. And the iteration should take about 15 minutes or so. And then we'll look at built-in methods, which will only take another 5-10 minutes. And then we've basically pretty much already covered what Replit looks like. I've been using it all night tonight, how to make some comments, and then how to format our code. And that's pretty much it for the for me talking in session 2. So I would guess all in all with questions, probably about 45 to 50 minutes in our next class. And then we're going to start getting into the challenges, which again, I have dropped in the Slack workspace. They go from easiest to hardest. You can start plucking at some of these if you want to. I don't cover all of them in class because some of them are a little bit redundant, but we'll hit a bunch of the basic ones, probably like the first 4 or 5 of those on the next class. All right. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording here real quick. Yeah, the problem list is the same as from the self-paced one.
Is this the challenges that we'll see on the application for like the DevOps immersion?
No,
Okay.
no, none of these are present on the actual CoderByte application. And so even for like the full-time immersive programming one, you won't see them. They're all more difficult than all except for one of the problems on here. And for the DevOps one, I honestly do not know what that application process looks like at all. So I would, but that is something I will find out, and I can talk more about that in our next class.
Awesome.